As usual, September is going to be a busy month for Apple fans with new iPhones, new Apple Watches, and new software. But I didn't want to lose track of the fact that September marks about 6 months since the M3 iPad Air was released. I had this weird fixation with the iPad Air. Maybe it's because the iPad Air 2 was such a legendary device back in the day. Having this channel was all the excuse I needed to pick up the 11-inch M3 iPad Air, and I've been using it since release. Now, this hasn't been my main iPad, but I've been using it for a variety of tasks. So I want to talk about how it's held up after 6 months, and also talk a little bit about its role in the iPad lineup now that iPadOS 26 is shaking everything up. The design of the iPad Air hasn't really changed since the 4th generation model in 2020, and really that's okay. This is still a really fresh and modern looking design. I ended up picking up mine in the blue color because it was the most interesting. Well, of course, I still wish, just like I did 6 months ago, that the blue was more blue like it is on the base iPad. I guess we gotta take what we can get. My favorite design improvement that came with this iteration was the removal of all the text off the back of the iPad. So you get a clean back with just the Apple logo, just like a modern iPhone. The 11th generation iPad got this as well, which indicates that this is going to be the new normal going forward, and I love it. It's a very clean design. Performance remains one of the iPad Air's strong suits. The 8-core CPU and 9-core GPU in the M3 remain snappy and responsive for everything that I, and I assume you, would use this iPad for, which is to say, everyday life stuff. Browsing the web, gaming, email. I've edited a few videos on this, and really the performance, just the feeling of it, was in the ballpark of the M4 iPad Pro. There's a lot of headroom here, and you know why that's a good thing? Because of iPadOS 26. The new liquid glass design produces a lot of blurring and reflections and refracting effects that are all created in real time. Now, Apple builds efficient and performant chips, but producing effects like this smoothly at 60 frames per second doesn't come for free. And so this is a case of, even though everyone complains about it, that extra performance headroom that iPads have coming in use. Thermals have really been mostly a non-issue with the M3 Air. That's not to say it doesn't thermally throttle and doesn't get hot, because it absolutely does. That's the trade-off of having a passively cooled device. Right now, there's really no way around it, but it's certainly no worse than any of the other iPads in the lineup. The only scenario I ran into where it maybe felt a little bit warmer than other iPads would be plugging it into a monitor. That was my case when I first reviewed it, and that's still the case today. I've seen complaints that the battery life of the M3 Air is worse than that of the M2 Air or even the M1 Air. And this is one of those areas where unfortunately I can't validate this because I don't have access to the older models myself. What I will say though is, in general, if there is one issue that is shared across the entire iPad lineup, it's battery life. The 10 hours that Apple used to, and I think maybe still does, advertise for iPads hasn't really been 10 hours in some time, especially if you're using it for these more intensive workflows. In my usage, the battery life has been a little bit better than that of the 11-inch M4 iPad Pro, but not to a large amount. And again, that's more anecdotal, just everyday usage. Let's talk about iPadOS 26. 6 months ago, the least expensive way to get into iPad multitasking with multiple windows was the iPad Air. But now with iPadOS 26, every compatible iPad will get access to windowed multitasking. And not just Stage Manager, the entire lineup gets the more Mac-inspired windowing with expose and window tiling. So instead of having to spend $599 for an iPad Air to get into that feature, in a few weeks you'll be able to get into that feature for as little as $349, and probably less because that base iPad's always going on sale. iPad Air is generally the universal recommendation for the best value iPad, but is that still true now that it's losing semi-exclusivity on a pretty big software feature, and a reason someone might choose an Air over a base iPad? Well, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First, multitasking on iPadOS is resource dependent, just like really any other operating system, meaning that while you're not stopped from opening as many windows as you want on whatever iPad you're using, depending on how much performance and how much RAM is available, the more windows you open, the more those older windows will start to suspend in the background and be frozen and not be active, not be doing processing. So while the base iPad and the iPad Air might be able to open the same amount of windows, on the iPad Air, more of those windows can be active in the background. Secondly, full external display support is still limited to M series iPads. So on the Air, you can drive up to a 6K display, Whereas on something like the base iPad or an older iPad, you'll be limited to display mirroring. Again, it goes back to that topic of headroom and longevity. So you may not be using the pro apps and the productivity features on your iPad today, but with the iPad Air, you have the headroom from a hardware and software capabilities to do that in the future if you so choose. At the time of this recording, there are a lot of rumors going around that Apple's planning on releasing a low-cost MacBook under $1,000. And with iPadOS 26, I really think people should be reconsidering whether or not the iPad Air could fill that low-end MacBook role. Now, before you say it, yes, the cost of an iPad Air, regardless of what size you go with, and the Magic Keyboard is probably going to be more than whatever this MacBook costs. Keep in mind that there are some advantages to going the iPad approach over a MacBook, right? MacBooks still have no touch support. MacBooks still have no cellular option. MacBooks still have no stylus support. And you can't just pull off the screen or even fold the keyboard around to use it as a tablet if you want to read or mark up a document or just watch a movie. You have that keyboard deck that's just always there, whether you need it to be or not. Speaking of keyboards, as I am a fan of saying, the Magic Keyboard is good, but you don't have to buy Apple's option. There are plenty of good third-party keyboard options out there, like this one from today's video partner, ESR. When ESR reached out to me a few weeks ago about sending me one of their products, I picked the Rebound magnetic keyboard case. I just really loved how this thing looked. Combining this product with iPadOS 26 really elevates the productivity experience on the M3 iPad Air. I really like the magnetic stand. It has a floating cantilever design that's premium and makes it really easy to detach the iPad and use it as a tablet. As you all know, as much as I love a good keyboard with my iPad, you never want to forget how good it is as a tablet. This case lets you easily jump between that kind of laptop mode and a more tablet mode. Speaking of keys, this is a great keyboard. The backlit keys are tactile and comfortable to type on, and, just like any modern iPad keyboard, you have a full set of function keys for controlling settings like screen brightness and volume without having to lift your fingers off of the keyboard. If you're updating to iPadOS 26 and want to take your iPad game to the next level, this is a case I would recommend giving a shot. It really does add value to the iPad experience. Use the link in the description to get yours and use this discount code to get 25% off your entire purchase. My thanks to ESR for their support. I'm not going to repeat myself from my original review where I talked about philosophical changes I'd like to see to the iPad Air line, but I do want to speak really quickly about a couple of smaller and more actionable changes I'd like to see for the iPad Air in the short term. The iPad Air has a single RAM configuration. All iPad Airs have 8 GB of RAM. Now last year, Apple decided that in the age of AI, 8 GB was not enough for the Mac, and they bumped the starting RAM configuration to 16 GB. I would argue the same should be true of the iPad as well. Now, if they want to keep the product lines differentiated and start the iPad at 12 GB instead, I'm okay with that too. But I think it's time out for 8 GB on iPads. Next would be USB ports. Now, iPadOS 26 kind of really begs and encourages users to use their iPad in a similar manner to how you might use your laptop or desktop. And as such, people are going to start plugging more things into their iPads, and I think some users are going to run up against the single port situation. And while many users, like myself, can get around that using a dock or an adapter, a second USB port, even if it was on the same side, although I prefer it was on both, it would really help to speed up certain workflows, to be able to charge or just have multiple drives plugged in easily when you're on the go. So again, I'm not upgrading from anything, but I don't think my upgrade advice has changed really from 6 months ago. The iPad Air remains the most balanced and best value iPad in the lineup. And with iPadOS 26, the iPad Air is an even stronger case for one of Apple's best value computers overall. If you have an M-series iPad Air, there's really no reason to jump up to the M3 Air. You're going to get all the benefits of iPadOS 26, and the hardware changes have been pretty minor. You're probably still pretty happy with what you have. If you're on anything older than an M1 iPad Air, or want to step up from something like the base iPad to something with a little more longevity, you're not going to go wrong with the M3 iPad Air. That's going to do it for this one. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you. I appreciate you and your time. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more iPad and soon iPhone content, since we're in iPhone season. And with that, I will catch you all in the next one. Thank you, and take care.